On today's episode of the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, even with the Dodgers' new improvements, why 2024 can still be the year of the snake.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. And I won't be able to do this podcast without any of you guys sharing, subscribing, listening, reviewing. So I just want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. Shout out to all the listeners of Locked on Diamondbacks. I would not be able to do this podcast without y'all. And on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about areas offensively that need to improve in 2024 and why they will improve. Lefty bats that the Dbacks can target still in free agency. But I first want to start here on today's podcast. Why 2024 can be the year of the snake. Why the Dbacks have a great opportunity this upcoming season. And because, listen, the NL West is not going to be easy next year. We see what the LA Dodgers are doing. You got teams like the Braves, you got teams like the Phillies. The talent is loaded in the National League next year. But I think the D-backs do have one of their best chances in franchise history to actually go out there and win the World Series in 2024. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Dodgers are not exactly, I don't think they're going to be the full throttle Dodgers in 2024. I think 2025 is going to be the year of LA. But I think for next year, the Dodgers are not going to be at full throttle in the NL West. And so I think the D-backs have a great chance to take the division and march their way all the way to the World Series. I mean, just think about it. The Dodgers, after getting swept to the D-backs, which had to be probably rock bottom for Dodgers fans in that front office and just Dodgers Nation everywhere, to get swept by the Arizona Diamondbacks, for Clayton Kershaw to maybe have his worst postseason start of all time after having many, many terrible starts. It was probably rock bottom for the Dodgers. And so they had to go out there and spend upwards of over $1 billion just to compete with the D-backs, just to be on an even playing field with the D-backs, if you could believe that. And so the Dodgers are going to be a team that have a lot of talent over the next decade plus. Like, don't get me wrong, that team is absolutely loaded, and they're going to be in the mix for a World Series for the foreseeable future. I said, I did a podcast right after the Dodgers got Shohei Ohtani. I was like, I'm not concerned. Still a lot of risks in that rotation and yada, yada. And then, since that podcast has dropped, they have gone out there and signed Yamamoto to that massive deal. They have gone out there and traded for Tyler Glass now. So I can officially say I'm way more concerned about the Dodgers than I was a few weeks ago before they made all these additions to the rotation. But even with these new additions in the rotation in the lineup, I still think this D-backs team can definitely take down the LA Dodgers in a postseason setting, which is all that matters. Doesn't really matter who wins the NL West, because if these two teams line up against each other in the playoffs, that's really going to be the whole story. The Dodgers could win every single series in the regular season against the D-backs, but if the D-backs beat them one time in the playoffs, that's all that anyone's going to matter. And the same is true vice versa. If the D-backs sweep the regular season series against the Dodgers but lose in the playoffs, that is all that anyone is going to remember. So Big stakes for both of these teams this upcoming season. This is probably the most anticipated matchup that we've seen between the D-backs and Dodgers in quite some time. They finally have some real beef between these two teams because usually it's the Dodgers knocking out the D-backs. So to see the D-backs knock them out in convincing fashion, and now the Dodgers are the ones adding talent, spending so much money to almost catch up with the D-backs, it's really funny to see. And I think it's going to be something that we're going to be watching for throughout the entire regular season, how those two teams match up, because I think those are going to be battles this upcoming season between the Dodgers and the D-backs. And the D-backs, they're going to have all the speed that they had from last year with way more power. That's why even with the addition of Shohei Ohtani to this Dodgers lineup, and don't get me wrong, they have arguably the best lineup in Major League Baseball right there with the Atlanta Braves, but the D-backs go out there and add a DH like a lot of us are going like a lot of us anticipate and think the D-backs are going to do, then why can't the Z-backs lineup compete with that Dodgers lineup in terms of runs scored, right? The D-backs have arguably the best second baseman in baseball in Ketel Marte, already an MVP frontrunner in Corbin Carroll. You got dudes who can hit 25 to 30 home runs and Lord Gurriel and Eugenio Suarez and Christian Walker. Like, the D-backs lineup is definitely not something to be messed with, and I think it definitely compares favorably to that Dodgers lineup. Despite the Dodgers lineup probably having more star power overall, I think the Dodgers outfield is pretty solid, but I also think it's a little suspect. Jason Hayward, yes, he had a fantastic season last year with the Dodgers. He's still pretty old. James Outman, rookie, solid rookie season. I think it's still a little bit of a question mark there. Same with Chris Taylor, a little bit up and down in nature. I like their outfield. James Outman's probably the guy I like the most, but I do think they have some question marks in the Dodgers outfield. The rotation upgraded, right? Yamamoto, Glass now, Walker Bueller's back, like major upside in the Dodgers rotation as well. But also, they do have some risk in that Dodgers rotation as well, right? Like, if this Dodgers team doesn't win multiple World Series over the next few years, like, this is all going to be considered a disappointment. And a guy like Yamamoto, I think he's going to be a stud. I think Yamamoto is going to win a Cy Young or two. But I can't also deny the fact that a 12-year deal, the richest contract ever to a pitcher who's never pitched on the major league level before, like, there is a little bit of risk there if we can be honest with ourselves. Again, I think Yamamoto is going to be a stud, but is it possible he's elite the first 5 years of that deal and then terrible the last 7? That's definitely in the realm of possibilities. Walker Buehler, one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball when he's right. What he did with the LA Dodgers pre-injury, he was absolutely nasty. Run prevention, striking out folks. I mean, ball control. This guy did not give up hits. This guy did not walk a ton of batters. This guy did not really give up a ton of home runs. Really the perfect kind of modern day pitcher. Walker Buehler has the talent to be anyone's number one starter in the rotation, but he is coming off injury and he'll probably be better in 2025. Glass now, elite, but he's someone that is kind of made of glass. Someone that we haven't really seen pitch a full season in Major League Baseball before. So I think 2024 could be the D-backs year because I just think 2025 sets up better for the Dodgers. Shohei Ohtani, he'll be back to pitching in 2025. Walker Buehler will be a year removed from the injury. You're going to have a more experienced Yamamoto. So I think the Dodgers' path to success is just better in 2025. Not to mention, the D-backs have a chip on their shoulder. They're out for revenge. They're out for blood. They want to finish what they couldn't finish this past year by getting a World Series. It's like what we've been saying with the Kansas City Royals 2014, 2015. The D-backs are trying to go back-to-back and complete the mission that they failed to do this past season with a World Series title. And the D-backs already know they can handle the LA Dodgers. They know they can handle teams like the Philadelphia Phillies as well. So this D-backs team, with the upgrades that they've already made this offseason to the lineup and the rotation, I think they're perfectly suited to make another deep postseason run and potentially complete the mission that they couldn't do in 2023. And we'll be talking about some options for the D-backs to target for a little DH if they want to go. We've heard some rumors about them adding a righty power bat, But now Mike Hazen's talking about maybe it's a lefty bat that the D-backs want to add. So we'll talk about some free agent targets, lefty options, DH edition for the Arizona Diamondbacks. But before we get there, I first want to talk to you guys about this little thing that I like to place my D-backs futures bets on because I think they're going to win the World Series in 2024. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm going to FanDuel Sportsbook and placing a little futures bet on the D-backs World Series odds in 2024 because score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. My favorite thing to do is whenever the Lakers are playing a mediocre team or a team below 500, take 80 over in points, 80 over in rebounds, and Lakers money line. The Lakers money line is always the toughest part to hit nowadays, but when it does hit, I feel good about myself. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And if you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now let's talk about some DH options, lefty edition for the Arizona Diamondbacks. We've talked a whole lot about DH options. A couple of these guys we've already discussed on the show before, but the first guy I want to discuss is a Jock Peterson, who I like more than a Conforto, coming off a down season compared to 2022 when he was an all-star, going to be 32 years of age. But Peterson, even though he only had 15 home runs in 121 games, I still think he has more power than what he displayed last season. In 2022, he had a 521 slugging, 23 home runs in 134 games. This is someone who back with the Dodgers have put up 36 home runs, 25, 25, 26. Like, this is a guy throughout his career has been in that 25 home run range. Real power threat from the left side of the plate. Maybe he's not the greatest defensive player in the world. That's why we want to bring him in as a power hitting lefty DH. The D-backs, I'll discuss in segment number 3 some stats that the D-backs need to work on for 2024. But Peterson is someone that played pretty well against righties, 241 average, 786 OPS against righties, but against lefties, really, really struggled. So he's definitely someone that's in that platoon category, just like all these options that we're going to talk about today. Maybe like the guy I'm going to talk about next. He's kind of fine in terms of batting from both sides of the plate, but a guy like Jock Peterson, they're definitely more platoon options than your normal free agent. Then the final guy that I think would be kind of interesting as a lefty DH for the Arizona Diamondbacks, another NL West friend, is Brandon Belt, who is a little bit older, going to be 36 years of age. Had a really down 2022 because in 2021, Brandon Belt only played 97 games, but in those 97 games, he had 29 home runs, 975 OPS. So, like, he was phenomenal in 2021. 2022, played 78 games. Numbers fell off a cliff, 213 average, 676 OPS, 8 home runs. Just didn't look like the same player that he was in 2021. But then last year in Toronto, 2023, major bounce back, 19 home runs in 103 games, 858 OPS. Like, the D-backs can get 2023 Toronto Blue Jays Brandon Belt to be their DH. I think that would be worth it as a guy that could play a little first base, as a guy that could provide a little power as well. I think Brandon Belt is definitely in the decline. I definitely think he's a little bit over the hill, but I think he can still provide a positive offensive contribution. I still think he's shown enough. 2 of the last 3 years, he's been a really good offensive player. Maybe he's not a guy that could play 150 games anymore, but if you could get 110 games of really good platoon left-handed batting with some power and pop as well, Brandon Belt could be an interesting option. So Now, for the D-backs to get to another World Series, there's some things that they're going to have to work on. That's why in segment number 3, we're going to discuss offensive areas the D-backs need to work on and improve if they want to make a deep postseason run in 2024. But did you know Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube? Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Okay. Welcome back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss some areas that the D-backs need to improve offensively. The first one that I want to discuss is kind of tied to what we discussed in segment number 2. The D-backs looking for potentially a lefty DH, because one thing that the D-backs were not good at in 2023 was lefties on lefties. When you look at D-backs left-handed batters versus left-handed pitchers, it was the worst grouping of anything. Worse than righties on righties, righties versus lefty pitchers, or excuse me, righty pitchers versus lefty batters, righty pitchers versus righty batters, or lefty pitchers versus righty batters. Lefties versus lefties was way worse than any other pairing. And the D-backs are going to need to improve in that area for them to just be a better team, because righty batters for the D-backs are fine against righty pitchers and are fine against lefty pitchers, and their lefty batters are fine against righty pitchers. It's only lefty batters versus lefty pitchers for the D-backs, because those guys had a 605 OPS, lefty batters versus lefty pitchers for the D-backs this past season. And that really falls on the Alec Thomases of the world. When you look at his splits, he was absolutely horrendous against lefties last year. The Jake McCarthy's of the world, even the Corbin Carrolls of the world, like pretty much all the D-backs lefties just suck against other lefty pitchers. And that makes sense to a degree, because, of course, when you're going against the same side, the numbers are always going to fall off a little bit, right? But a guy like JD Martinez, who we've talked a lot about on this podcast, he's someone that crushes on both sides of the plate. And when you look at some of the best offensive players in Major League Baseball, yeah, they may favor it aside, but a guy like Mike Trout, he's still going to crush both sides of the plate. Aaron Judge, Mookie Betts, the best of the best all do that. Now, Alec Thomas, Jake McCarthy, those guys aren't the best of the best, but you can't look like the worst of the worst when you're a lefty going against another lefty. So those guys have to improve dramatically for this D-backs team to take it to another level, because pre-signing Lourdes Gurriel, you're going to have 4 lefty outfielders, which was going to be way too many. And potentially the D-backs are going to bring in a lefty DH. And if they do, hopefully they bring in a guy that can help these platoon stats, because lefty pitchers were just able to shut down D-backs, half a D-backs lineup last year. That's why Torey Lovello goes with a heavily platoon situation, because the numbers tell you if you got lefty pitcher on the mound, all your D-backs lefties are going to struggle mightily. And sometimes you're going to need your Alec Thomas in the game for his defense, or a Jake McCarthy in the game for his speed. So those guys have to improve so they can play and be effective against lefty pitchers. The second thing that the D-backs need to improve on is their third base and DH just have to be better. The D-backs did address these concerns by trading for Eugenio Suarez, right? Last year, D-backs third baseman, 234 average, 644 OPS, and only 10 home runs. Suarez should help that area out a lot, immensely. This is a guy with a ton of power. He plays solid defense as well, and at the very least, he should give you 25 home runs and like 80 RBIs at the very least. Maybe he still bats 230, but maybe his OPS is like 790, something like that. Like, regardless, Suarez should be a major upgrade over the D-backs third base situation last year with the Emmanuel Rivera's of the world, with the Evan Longoria's of the world. Like, that was such a hole in the D-backs lineup in the postseason. Longo just did nothing for you. Rivera did nothing for you. Maybe at times it was like, should we go with Jordan Lawler at shortstop and move Perdomo over to third base? The D-backs never did that because they at least like Longoria's approach at the plate. But third base was a hole once we got to the postseason last year. And the DH as well. Not good for the D-backs last year. The D-backs look like they're going to address that concern by adding one more bat to play their DH position next year. They haven't done that yet, but when they do, it's going to be a major improvement because the D-backs DH, yes, they had 22 home runs and 97 ribbies last year, but they still only had a 219 average, a 678 OPS. Like, even despite the power and the RBI production, think about how much better your DH could be if it is a Soler or JD or Reese Hoskins or really anyone. You can have more power, can have more run production, and just a better stat line overall. Like, if your third base and DH was producing like that last year for a team that went to the World Series, imagine what that offense is going to do with a Suarez and potentially a JD Martinez in those slots next season. So I'm really excited for the D-backs to add one more DH. And so this whole lineup situation can just be complete and we can stop talking about it. Then the final thing that the D-backs need to improve on is they have to be better against power pitchers next season. Power pitchers, guys who throw really hard, really dominated the D-backs last year. 213 average, 645 OPS against power pitchers last year. And this is where adding some of the dudes that they added this past offseason can help. Eugenio Suarez throughout his career has been a really good fastball hitter, has declined a little bit the last couple years, but when he was right, this was a guy that was routinely batting over 300, and even still, his average might only be around 270 against the fastball. He's still slugging percentage between 480 upwards of 550 against the fastball. Eugenio Suarez should definitely help out against power pitchers. Same if the D-backs go out there and sign JD Martinez or Jorge Soler. Those guys crush power pitchers, and the D-backs need more guys that could handle that fastball. Today's sport, so many pitchers throw hard. Throwing 95 to 97 is so important for so many guys. You need dudes in your lineup that can keep up with that speed and velocity. I don't think the D-backs were always overpowered last year, but at times you could definitely see it. There were pitchers who they just got in a groove, like the Zach Wheelers of the world, who throw really hard. Those kind of guys dominated this D-backs lineup last year, but now you add in a couple dudes who could change the course of the game with one swing of the bat, with like a Suarez, potentially a Soler as well. D-backs will have better options against power pitchers next season, 2024, and I think that will go a long way for the D-backs lineup. Like we've said, they've had the speed. The speed is coming back in 2024, but now you add the power component as well. This D-backs team, this offense, I think could be really deadly and really scary next season. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Merry Christmas to everyone. Come back in a couple of days for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.